My pleasure to be here. These gentlemen here, you want to get a good look at. You don't want to run into them in a dark alley. Actually, to be honest with you, and you can kind of follow this on the way through, of the four of these gentlemen, there's one of them that you wouldn't mind facing. He's a lot nicer than he looks, and we'll let that unfold as we go along. The rest of them, no, they mean it. That look on their face is real. I'll tell you their names real quick, and then I've got a story to tell you to kind of build into it. We got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to go fast, but we'll see how it goes. So the gentleman on your left is named Ritzmer Goings. All right, and so we'll talk about him. The next one is named Gentleman Gerald Chapman. The third one, some of you already know, that's Bob Zwick. And the last one is his name, the cheat sheet below there, his name is Lloyd Hebenstreet. So here's the story. A long time ago, 1930, April of 1930, my great uncle, my name's David Burk, my great uncle Carl Burk was a teller in a bank in Reading, Ohio, on Benson Street in Reading, Ohio. A gang busted in there to rob the place. And the first thing, within the first few moments, my uncle realized that the man who was holding a gun on him had gone to grade school with him. They were friends in grade school. They knew each other very well. And the second thing that happened was my uncle realized that he probably was going to be killed because he would easily be able to. There had just been a case in Cincinnati of an eyewitness being killed so that the person could go free. That in the story of Bob Zwick, a very famous story that I won't go all the way into but may mention. So Bob Zwick had just done this very thing and killed someone that could identify a robber and killer. And so not to be indelicate, but my uncle lost control of his bowels at that point. It's a very famous family story. It was told every time my family ever got together. And when my uncle was alive, he hit the punchline, always hit it perfectly, and we always got a big laugh out of it. The gentleman who was holding a gun on him was the last gentleman here, named Lloyd Hebenstreet. And of course, he was from Reading. They both were from Reading, Ohio. And so Lloyd Hebenstreet did not kill my uncle that day. In fact, he said to him, "You're all right, Burke, go over there and stand against the wall." And he continued to rob the bank. And so we'll kind of circle back around to that story. But here's the bank on Benson Street. If you go on Benson Street now, it's all wedding shops. I don't know if anybody's had a reason to go on Benson Street, but you can't swing a cat without hitting a wedding shop down there. And so the bank, right now, there is a bank on this spot. This is the bank, and there's a bank on the spot, but it sits back. It's a modern bank with a drive-through and so on. The building across the street, you can barely see, it says Meat Market. Frank Gase, he was involved in the story when we get back around to it, but these buildings are still stand. So this is a picture that was taken during the Depression. So that was 1930. Jump ahead to way later. My father died in 1983, and this is Lloyd Hebenstreet in the middle here. These are two pictures of a beautiful woman by the name of Esther Jenin, and so we'll talk about her. But my father died and was buried in St. Peter and Paul Cemetery in Reading. And so my father and mother, now my mother was at the funeral for my father, and this tree somehow grew up. I don't know how it was planted or what, but that's their headstones, their military headstone for my father, and my mother's buried there as well. So June day, very hot. I'm there at the funeral, the hole is still open, and I step down, and I'm not really thinking, it's a terrible day, I'm grieving, and I step down, and I just kind of like circle downhill a little bit and circle around to right here, and something caught my eye on this headstone. Right there is buried Lloyd Hebenstreet, the bank robber. Not only that, but Uncle Carl is buried about right here. Okay, so the robber and the teller are staring at each other across a little driveway for all of eternity. And this is Heban Street's whole family is in here, and right above my family. So how in the world? And I could see the dates on his tombstone, and he lived to his mid-40s. And I thought, well, why did I never hear of him? Why, what is this? How does this story unfold? He's in his 40s and he dies in a hail of bullets or something. What happened? Well, I didn't even. It was obviously it was a day of a different sort for me, and so I didn't even really think anything about it. And so now, from the 80s, you have to go forward to 2015 when I retired. So I retired and I was sitting drinking coffee. I was having, oh man, the day's mine. I can do what I want. And I remembered, I think somebody told me that you can get on the internet and look up old newspapers. And so I thought, well, what will I look up? I need something to look up. Is there anything in my family that I could look up? And well, Uncle Carl was in that bank. That'd make the papers, wouldn't it? So I look it up. It's 2015, early summer of 2015. And here's the headline of the day that my uncle always told about. Pistol battle rages outside as bandits rob Reading Bank. Grocer forces exit of thugs. All right. So this is about 8 o'clock in the morning, and about 6 cups of coffee later, and later in the afternoon, I had read this. It had led me to some other articles and kept leading me on. Here's the page of the Inquirer that it's out of. I think this is Inquirer. The article that I just showed you is down here. It's not even the headliner. At the exact same time that bank was being robbed, a bank up on Xenia Avenue in Dayton was being robbed at almost the exact same time. And that's the article that's up here. These guys got 8,000, they got 33,000 up there. Turns out, and again, I just wasn't a person that was interested in bank robbery. It wasn't a big topic for me by the time I retired, but this got my attention, and I've never let up. What I tell you started on that day. And so just to say very quickly, this building still stands. It's a church now. And that bank was robbed by a couple of the guys who had been the shooters in the St. Valentine's Day massacre. So not our local bank. Those guys, they had some nationwide connections, but not like that. So those stories have engrossed me ever since then. So I began just pouring through everything I could find, and just to learn about this. And sometime I said, there's some great stories here. There's some fabulous stories. I'm a storyteller. Taught reading at Ross Middle School and Morgan Elementary School, and have worked as a storyteller and writer. And so these stories need to be told. In fact, as my brother tells me, keep your health up, because if you die before these get told, nobody's going to know about them. So the book about some of this overlaps some of the stuff that's in my book. The manuscript just went to History Press last week. So I actually haven't heard back from him yet. I'm a little nervous not hearing back from him. But it should be in print. They said the shortest would be 4 months and the longest would be a year. So Heban Street is in there. Heban Street is in that book. So now we're going to change. So that's how I got started. And finally, I just kept looking, and finally just felt like, I pretty much know about all the bank robberies in Southwest Ohio. What was the first one? Are there any that I'm missing? And I've gotten to the point now where I pretty much know them all. And so these are 4 of my favorite stories that I don't know which one will kind of click with you, so I'll try to get a little bit into all of them, and you can see. Do we have anybody here from Riley, Ohio? Or Oxford, outside Oxford, or McGonigal? This story takes place in the little town of Riley. Do you know where I'm talking about? Okay. The nearest stoplight, I think, still is in McGonigal. Okay, so we're not talking about a big place. In fact, the railroad doesn't go through there. The closest the railroad, the people that when they needed to go to the railroad line, they needed to go to a place called Wood Station, which is a little closer to Oxford. There's still Wood Station Road up there. And so here's the story. This gentleman is named Joseph Urmston. He is not exactly a bank robber. He's a crook, but he's not a bank robber. And so he was born right after the Civil War. And his family, there's still Urmston's own property up there. There's Urmston's all around, and so you got to be careful what you say, all right? And so Joseph Urmston wasn't, I mean, he wasn't a ne'er-do-well. He just kind of was raised there. You can see there's a page here from a alumni book for Miami University, very rare for somebody from right down the bottom of the hill down there in Riley to go up and go to the big university up at the top of the hill in Oxford. But he did go for a year, and he even studied civil engineering, and he even went someplace up in Ohio and worked as a civil engineer for a year or two, and then he came home. I think his father passed, and he came home and lived with his mother and took care of some of the business. They had stores, they had a lot of farms, and were in several different businesses. Joseph Urmston just one day just announced, with no background, nothing, he said he was going to start a bank. He was going to open a bank in Riley. And so here's the headline, Riley to have a new bank. If you're in Riley, there's not a whole bunch of money running around that you're going to need a ton of places to store money. But this says that he had a good reputation. That is not exactly true. There are some people that would disagree with that. There was some disagreements about some dealings with cattle where things didn't work out the way they should. And also he was in business with someone. That person gave him money to pay off some creditors, and then when he went to check the bank account where they were supposed to be, there was something like 10 cents in the bank account, and Urmston had to pay the money back. I think he paid it back at 70 cents on the dollar or something. So let's not say that he's the greatest candidate to open a bank. No training in banking or anything like that. So he opens the bank. At one of my talks that I gave out in Morgan Township, there was a woman there who had lived, I'll show you where the bank was, and she had owned the property at one time, and when they tore down one of the buildings, here was a check for that actual Riley Bank. If you get one of these, don't try to cash it. It's not going to work. All right. If you know you're Riley, I won't. If you do, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I made sure that it had Riley Pizza on here because that's what everybody knows. So here's Riley. You're coming down from Oxford right here. Here's Riley Pizza. And if you go over to what's called Sample Road now, 732, Sample Road runs down, and there's it used to be a kind of a dollar store kind of a thing right here. I think it's closed now. And there are these things that makes it look like a trident. These are alleys. 2 alleys that come across there. The bank, this arrow points to right where the bank was. It's just back in the alley. There was a home right here where the Urmston, he and his wife lived with their children, and right behind it in the alley was just a little shed, and that was the bank. But they did have, you know what kind of safe they had, right? They had a Mosler safe. They put that in all their advertisement, okay? So they made sure that they had a Mosler safe. So here's what it looks like right now. If you continue on down the road, Riley Pizza, right back there. The home sat right here. There's an empty lot right there now. And right about where that little lawnmower shed is it wasn't you'll see it in a minute, but it wasn't a whole lot bigger than that shed. And that was Riley's proud bank. So, I mean, it'd be nice to tell this as a detective story because there's a lot of elements in here. But I'm going to go ahead and spoil a lot of it right now. He was not a good banker. He ran himself into trouble. He owed a ton of money. He was making shady deals, and he needed to hide and cover his tracks. What some bankers would do, there was just coming on the kind of accountability for banks that they have now, was just beginning, especially for the small banks. And so he knew it was coming, and he needed to hide his tracks. What a lot of them did was hire someone to blow their bank up or set it on fire so that the records would be all gone. But he couldn't very well do that because it was in his backyard. He might kill his family. So he didn't do that. He hired somebody to rob the place. All right, and that's the story. here's what it looked like right about where that second little, like the alley went right through there, and this was the home where they lived. There was actually a store downstairs, and they lived upstairs. The Urmstons did. The guy that robbed their bank. Here are two books about tramps, okay? The one on the right, obviously Jack London, the great writer, spent over a year riding the rails, catching trains and so on. And so he wrote very well and very fluently, obviously, about it. And the other book is a fabulous book. The guy's named Jack Black. There's a Jack Black now that's a comedian and actor. This is not him. This guy left home and rode the rails as well. So if you want to find out about this lifestyle of what's getting ready to happen, these are the two books. But I just think they're fabulous books, especially You Can't Win, which, what a title, right? So it's got a great title. So a gentleman, I could tell you a lot about him. His family was the most hated family in Syracuse, New York. Through a long story, they were responsible for storing gunpowder without anyone knowing it along the canal. You were talking about canals. That was the era of canals, and they had a wood shop alongside the canal. Stored gunpowder in there. It blew up, killed a bunch of people, wrecked a whole section of Syracuse, New York. And that was the robber of the bank. That was his grandfather. So his family had to leave. They ended up going to a couple different places, ended up in New York City. His son, without going into it too much, became a pianist and fell in love with a songbird, a young woman, beautiful woman, fell in love with her, and they had a child, Ritzmer Goings. They had several children, and one of them was Ritzmer Goings. So that's how far I go back with Ritzmer Goings. That's him. Not a promising lad. He, when his mother died young, may have died in childbirth when he was born. His father moved to Cincinnati and worked in the music publishing. He was an engraver and worked in music publishing. Well, that left a lot of time for Ritzmer to be on the street, and so he got himself in trouble. He spent a bit of time in what was called the House of Refuge, which was not a house of refuge. It was a combination orphanage and children's prison in Cincinnati, right along I-75. It's gone now, not too far from the workhouse. It was on the same grounds as the workhouse. And so that's where Ritzmer kind of came up. Interesting thing, their records are all detailed, and the University of Cincinnati has them, and they're online. They're digitalized. You can see all about him. He didn't cuss. He smoked. Oh no, he didn't smoke. He cussed a bit, but he didn't smoke. And he could read, okay, which was rare on his page. As you look down, most of them couldn't read. But he had wanderlust. He started catching trains out of Cincinnati. They caught him one time up in New York, state of New York. He may have been involved in some, kind of mugging type activity up there when he was young. And so he's riding the rails. He's all over the country. He was actually out in Nebraska, shot a guy out in Nebraska during a robbery out there. And so you never know where Ritzmer Goings would show up. Well, he showed up in Cincinnati, and then he made his way to Hamilton. This building still stands. This is on Puthoff Street in Hamilton. Do you know Puthoff Street? Okay, if you're going out Main Street, you got the railroad tracks are 2 blocks over. If you know what I'm talking about, the railroad tracks headed north are 2 blocks over. And for the first several of those blocks, there's a little street called Puthoff Street, right in Hamilton, on the west side of Hamilton. This building is still there. It was a grain elevator. Now, somebody told me that they worked in this building and it's filled with old refrigerators. I don't know, but apparently it's filled with old refrigerators. But at one time, it had a safe inside, and when Ritzmer Goings had just gotten out of prison, and in prison, that's the finishing school for criminals, so he had learned how to blow a safe, or so he thought. And so he went and blew this safe. And their telephones were rare, but 2 elderly women across the street on the 2nd floor watched the whole thing happen, and they had a telephone. And so they called in, and the police came. And these guys were not the brightest criminals there ever were, so the police said, what are you doing? And they started firing. So there was a big gun battle right there on Put-Off Street. You can take a little drive. To get your driver to take a drive there on the way home, you can go see Put-Off Street, and you can see where that happened. So behind there, you can kind of see it a little bit. Behind there, it drops off, and the railroad tracks run north out of Hamilton, or actually west out of Hamilton. And so the guys jumped out these windows, and there were 3 or 4 of them. They jumped out the windows and they took off on the railroad tracks. Well, all of them went up the tracks except for Rich McGowan's. He went south. He went into Hamilton, whatever direction. He went into Hamilton. And the policeman went to a call box and he said, we know where they go when they go to Hamilton. They went to what is now Pershing Street, which was once called Wood Street. And Wood Street was everything that every city ever had a bad street. We had it right there down at the bottom of what's now Pershing. They changed the name and named it after a general because the Army sort of like outlawed any Army during World War I, any Army personnel showing up on Wood Street. They said, we're even changing the name. So they changed it to Pershing Avenue in Hamilton. I live not far from there. And so he was headed for what they called the jungles, which was down at the bottom of Pershing. There were brothels and gambling dens and so on down there. They caught him, one of my favorite moments. They set a little trap and they caught him in the middle of Columbia Bridge. If you're from Hamilton, you just cannot top that. Okay, he's running across Columbia Bridge. You would use soap and wax to put in the cracks of the safe. You put in the cracks of the safe, and then you could put the nitroglycerin down, and you had to buy dynamite or steel dynamite, boil it, and then you had to pour off the water, and the nitroglycerin was at the bottom, and you were very likely to be blown up while you were doing that. And if you made it through, you got a little vial of nitroglycerin. So he took that, put it in the safe, put the wax and soap in there and put it in, and then blew the safe. But that's when the shootout occurred. So when they caught him, he had wax and soap all over him, and there was probably an outline of his body up there in the thing with no wax or soap and wax soap all around. So they catch him. So he's known in Hamilton. He did not go to prison over that. He got off somehow, not enough evidence or something, and he got off. So somehow or another, he connected with the banker. And the banker says, look, rob my bank, okay? Come, take the stuff, and you take what you can get. So there he is again. That's the battle of Put-Off Street right there that they're talking about. That's the bank. So they came down the hill. It's now Sample. It's not Sample Road anymore. I forget. Maybe it is Sample now. I forget what it was called then. But they came down the hill, went back in the alley. They came in here. This building behind it was a livery stable. There was a 10-year-old boy in there. And 2 stories. One says that they shot at him and he dove back into the hay. Another one says that they invited him to come and watch. And so the different newspapers say different things. But they came in, Rich McGoings took all his great skills and came in for some reason, no one knows. They put this wood, this is the day after the robbery, and they made a little wall right here, which means nothing, it's barrels and junk and so on. They stacked some boards up here. And so Rich McGoings, I think it was 11 times he had to blow the safe. And so he wasn't too good. It usually took some time because you started with a small dose and then tried to build up. But so they finally got the safe blown. There were 2 gentlemen, a doctor and his hired man were across the street, and they held them at gunpoint. They wouldn't let them out of the house, wouldn't let them get to the part. They had a telephone, but they wouldn't let them get to the part where the telephone was, which tells them, my detective friends, the burglars already knew where the telephone was. And they knew not to let him into that part. Meanwhile, while these blasts are going off, up here in the house is Urmston and his wife. His wife knows nothing. Okay, he cruelly did all this. She wasn't in on it at all. She made him get into bed because he was acting all brave. I'm going to go down. And, oh, no, don't do that. He's like, okay. And so he stayed up there. And just the more you read about it, it's just so clear cut. So they didn't get much money. I forget what they got, $700 or something. But they took a bunch of bonds. Now the bonds were useless to them. They were not negotiable. And people like Ritzmer Goings would have thrown those bonds on the floor. They never would have touched those bonds. They had no use for them because the only thing you could do with those bonds was hold them ransom back to the banker. That's the only thing you could do. And these guys lived on trains. They weren't going to hang around town and do that. So they stole the bonds and disposed of them, and that covered the tracks for the banker who had all kinds of misdealings in his paperwork. Okay? No one knows what happened to Ritzmer Goings. There's many tramps. He disappeared, and there's no record of whatever happened to him. But watch this. No one also knows what happened to William Urmston. He was there. It was announced that the bank examiners were coming. He said, "Everything's great, come on ahead." Got on a train to Cincinnati and was never seen again. Never seen again. And studying this stuff, I'll tell you that that's never happens. People that commit crimes go someplace else and commit more crimes. People that do dumb stuff go someplace else and do dumb stuff. They may change their name, but it almost always comes out. There's no other case that I know like this. I know of a lot of absconders. I followed through a lot of them. They all end up, you know what happened to them. Some of them were going to South America. There were some countries that didn't have extradition, and they would go to South America. We knew they were down there. They'd be in the paper. Well, they're working as a cowboy. They're doing this or that. He disappeared completely and was never seen again. And they found out other dealings that he had that were shady. There's a lot more in there, but it's a great story. Has anyone here seen this banker? He's wanted by State Banking Department on charges of forgery. So did he leave his wife? He just dropped and left his wife, left his children. Her family. She was. I mean, think of what her name was, but. Lily was her first name. I'm trying to think what her maiden name is, but there's still people out in that area from that family. And her father was actually from Indianapolis, and he came and lived there for a while, and then the whole family, she and he and the children went to Alabama. And I mean, I've seen graduation pictures of their grandchildren and everything. They ended up, I mean, she made a life for herself and worked in the church and pulled herself back together. But she was a true victim. I'm glad you brought that up. She was victimized as badly as anybody. One thing though, they didn't look for him all that hard. I don't think anybody was that concerned about finding him. I don't think her heart was broken over not spending time with him. I'm editorializing. We're moving on to a new bank robber. This gentleman is named Gentleman Gerald Chapman. His birth name is Gerald Chartres. He's going to rob a bank in Middletown. Forget Riley. We're now at the big metropolis of Middletown, Ohio. He is a national figure. Before Dillinger, if you'd ask somebody who the big bank robbers are, they would have mentioned this gentleman right here and his partner, who I'll show you in a second. He was raised in New York City, raised poor. He was a pickpocket and went to prison, met his partner, which we'll see in a second. And his partner was cultured, had come over from Europe and was an avid reader and very well spoken. And so they were in prison, had plenty of time on their hands. So this gentleman became a big reader and began to speak with an accent just out of nowhere, always dressed up, and he was a stone cold killer. They stole over $1 million. I think it was the first $1 million heist. They pulled over a mail truck in New York City, and then he lived in a part of New York City called Gramercy Park, and that's kind of like a gated community. Like you don't even get in there. Like we can't go unless we know somebody in there. With stolen funds, had a girlfriend, and so these guys were known in the early part in the 19 teens and 20s. This is his partner, George Dutch Anderson. Again, he's from Europe. He was killed later in a shootout up in Michigan. In the shootout, he was killed at the same time that he killed the police officer who killed him. They both did something that almost no one did. They both escaped earlier before they get to Middletown. They both escaped from the federal prison in Atlanta. And no one escaped from there. It was national news, world news, that they, at different times, this one tunneled out. Chapman went and cut out the power to the whole place and had a ladder that he put together he had parts of it, put it together real quick, climbed a very high wall and got away. And for some reason, where they ended up hiding out was in Muncie, Indiana. Muncie, Indiana. Well, if you're in Muncie, Indiana and you're running out of money, you got to find a place that's in the general area, not too close, and then you're going to rob the place. And so that's what they did. First, they went to Steubenville, Ohio, and stole a car that looked just like this. Look at that beautiful thing. And this was the fastest car on the road. So I believe it's a Packard. No, it's a Lincoln. This one's a Lincoln. And so they steal the Lincoln. Now that's kind of conspicuous in Middletown. Here's how banking worked. When you were low on money, every day at the exact same time, you sent 2 teenage boys down the street to the mail, U.S. mail, and they had a little sack over their arm, and they just brought back the cash, just walked up the street with it. They were couriers. These people were robbed constantly. That's why they sent teenage boys. And we're going to send a real banker. Like we'll send somebody, somebody expendable. And so they did it all the time. And so these guys are like, there's a blue Packard or a blue Lincoln that's parked here, the same place every day. I don't know what they're doing. Oh, well, let's go get our money. And so Chapman and Anderson go to rob the bank. This building still stands. This is an older picture of it. Central and Main, I believe. Do you know your Middletown? We got Middletown people in here. There's a more recent picture of it here in a second. They never went inside the bank. Never had to. They just robbed those boys. And nothing they could do. They surrounded them, jumped out of the car, surrounded them, had guns, took the money, and left. Here's an old picture, and then that's the, you really can't see it. You can't make it out even if you could see this up close. This is the post office, and the columns are right there. They don't really show up. So here's the bank. Someplace right in there is where the robbery took place, and they escaped. There it is, a modern picture of it. And this says Cincinnati State. It's now part of Cincinnati State College. Another old teacher, book lover, super bandit, visitor to Queen City, library attendant called in Gerald Chapman trial to identify stolen books. He took books from the library and didn't return them. I'm sitting there reading about him, and I'm thinking, he's killed a lot of people, but for some reason, this really gets my goat. Take books right out of the library. And they were books on printing, and because they were going to try to make money. They were going to try to counterfeit money. So there's pictures of him. He was caught in Muncie. Anderson went and killed the guy that ratted him out, like when he's in prison here. And then he was killed. I don't want to be too graphic, but the thing was called the jerker, the thing that he was killed. Instead of the old kind of hanging where they would put you up high and drop you, they made like a catapult, and you just sat in a chair, and then they would start to catapult. So yeah, that's how he lost his life. But no, that was the government. No, that was the government. He had killed someone up in up in the east, Massachusetts or someplace, robbing a store at night, and a policeman came in and he had killed him. So when they found him, they sent him back there, and he stood trial. No, that was government issue. Yeah. There's a word before it, the something jerker. I don't think about it too much. It's too gross, but that's how he lost his life. Okay. 3 books about him. There's some other things, some good things online. I have the one on the far left. Okay, it's not very well written. It's that kind that's written with, well, Dutch, what do you think we should do next? It's like fictionalized, and it just doesn't work for me. The one on the right has its own problems. It's about 800 pages. This man still lives in Muncie. I'd like to talk to him, but my goodness gracious, I'm thorough, but he's just page after page. It's only available online. It wasn't a big seller, okay? The one in the middle, I only know of one copy. I think there's some copies that look like they're for sale on eBay and so on, and I think you have to have about $850 to get a copy. But you can go to Muncie, they got it in their library up there. So just to let you know that this is a real person. All right, we're going to bank robber number 3. Riley, okay, Middletown. Now we're going to go to a couple places right around here, but the main one is going to be Somerville. Somerville. Do you know Somerville? I've lived here all my life, and there's no reason to go through it. It's on Route 127 headed up north, and 127 does not go through it. It's not far from Camden, okay? And I know where it is, but I've never actually gone through it. This, I usually can go a little quicker on this because this is Bob's Wick. Bob's Wick is quite famous in this area. He spent time down in the jungles. Okay, we can use our reference points now. He spent time down there gambling, staying with prostitutes and so on, and hiding out. Because it wasn't Hamilton County. They could rob in Hamilton County and come up here, and it was just as if they went to the moon. I mean, the jurisdiction didn't cross over. Also, it was corrupt as anything here. You pay off the right people and you can get away with whatever you want. There was a lot of corruption. So on the left is Bob's Wick at his first communion. In the middle, obviously, he is in the Navy. He was on the USS Oklahoma, which incidentally later was sunk at Pearl Harbor. And then they raised it and were taking it to scrap, and it sank before they could take it where they were going to scrap it. But he served when it was a brand new boat, served during World War I, spent most of the time in Ireland, off Ireland, on the boat, stationed off Ireland. They were supposed to guide merchant ships through that part of the Atlantic Ocean, but they didn't do a whole lot. They mainly fought with the Irish locals. And then the picture on the far right, we won't go into it too much, but that was the day he was captured. Didn't go well for him. So that's Bob's Wick. There's this girlfriend, okay. Her name is, they called her Dago Rose Myers, all right. And when I've shown this picture before, people kind of like, ugh, okay. If Dago Rose was here, she would be glad that we chose this picture. The other pictures are far worse. She looks great. She's kind of dolled up. She's actually turning herself in that day, that she's dressed up and got herself together. She was on the run for a long time with Bob's Wick. So Bob's Wick was, when he came back from the service, he tried to go straight, but he had already, even as a kid, goodness gracious, he robbed the poor box at his church. Okay, he robbed the girls' locker room at his church, okay, down in Cincinnati, down the east side of Cincinnati. So it was pretty well known that he wasn't exactly a choir boy. But he goes to World War II, good service record, honorable discharge, World War I, honorable service, discharge, and good record, comes back, starts working for the railroad. A bunch of his family worked for the railroad, B&O Railroad, and just got involved in the nightlife and whatever. I don't think he was fighting it too hard, but he ended up in a lot of roadhouses and so on. And so there was just easy money through bootlegging. And you would start as a guard because if I'm a bootlegger, I'm not worried about the police. I'm worried about the other bootleggers. Okay? The police I can pay off. Those other bootleggers are going to kill me and sell what I have. If I'm driving down the road with liquor, they're going to end up with the liquor and I'm going to end up in the ditch. So I have to hire some very, very tough people. So he's one of the war veterans that started there. Then he started doing the hijacking. That you would move up. It's like a little, plan for your career. Then you would move up to hijacking. Then you would say, well, why don't I just get my own still and hide it over in northern Kentucky someplace or whatever. And so then I'll be a hijacker. And they would do things like one of his buddies bought a hot car and went to Florida and bought an old Coast Guard boat to go over to Haiti or someplace and get rum and bring it across. So these guys, he's back. But bootlegging changed in 1928-29. After been in for quite a while, it was like everything else. The rich got richer. The big bootleggers started to pay off and take control of everything, and the small-time bootleggers were losing money, and there was a change in the way liquor was coming in from Canada. It wasn't as lucrative anymore. So these guys, let's see, we're war veterans. We've killed a bunch of people. We're not worried about that. We've got the hottest cars there are, and we know exactly how to drive them, exactly where to take them. We've got the best guns. The cops can't touch us for our arsenal, and we don't care what we do. Oh, but we need money because we're alcoholics and gambling addicts and frequent houses of prostitution. What are we going to do? Let's rob banks. Okay, because banks were kind of like still new in a way. They're like, that's a good idea. Okay, the banks before that were all down in cities, and so now there started to be banks in communities. Let's rob those. And so in January of it was December of 1929, he gets together. He had killed several of his bootlegging partners, so people were like reluctant to sign on with his gang, go figure. They were like, a lot of your guys get killed. I think I'm going to pass on this. And so he needed a gang to go rob banks with, and these guys he had known from bootlegging. And so the one on the far, on your right, is a Hamilton boy. Raymond Tagg Lee. The others are from northern Kentucky. Raymond Tagg Lee was arrested on Sycamore Street, which runs along the railroad track over. He was going 70 on Sycamore Street. Go do that sometime. Go see how you make out. I can't imagine going 40 over there. Okay, Sycamore Street runs right on the other side, looks like an alley on the other side of the railroad tracks. This is the Somerville Bank, still a bank. And still in service. And so that's what it looks like today. And then here is an old picture. They would always steal a car. So they've got a stolen car, those four guys. They pull up at the bank. It's broad daylight. They weren't big planners. They had actually come down here and cased a bank on Main Street. And they saw two police officers go into it and say, okay, we won't rob that one. Then they went to Oxford. And they went into the bank, and it was a Friday or a Saturday, and there were a lot of people in the bank. So they came, we don't want to go in, there's too many people. Okay, and Zwick says to him, I know a bank we can rob. There's only one guy in it, and the rest are women, and it was going to be no problem. We'll go in there and rob that bank. So they go into this bank. Three of them go in. One gets behind the counter. They go in. This young woman is in there. Don't have her name in front of me anymore, but she was a teller in the bank, or a bookkeeper in the bank. And she and the banker's wife are working in the bank, and one of the guys starts kind of bullying them, like get over against the wall. Well, the banker, this is how his name was Brown. The banker just walks right up to the guy who's holding a gun, bullying these women, and just says, you can't do that in here, and starts fighting him. The gun goes off. The two women begin screaming. Zwick really liked to do this. He was standing nearby, and he walked up and clubbed the guy with his pistol. Okay, that's what he liked. That was one of his favorite moves. And so he clubbed the banker. The banker starts bleeding. He's laying on the ground and laying on the floor. And they robbed the bank. They got decent money on that. I think they got $1,800 or something. Pretty low, but decent money. They come out. There's a barber across the street who everybody had a gun in those days. Okay, and so the barber just reaches back in the back room, and he's got a rifle, loaded rifle. And so, or he thought it was loaded. I'm not sure what happened, but he brings it out, and Shearer was one of the guys was at the car. And Shearer said later that he heard the click, that the guy pointed the gun right at his head, and he heard the click, but the gun didn't go off or wasn't loaded. So they jump back in their car. It's a cold day. It's December. And this one's in January, excuse me. Where'd they go first? Richmond, Indiana. Had lunch. Okay. Little diner. Then they split up. They were hiding out in Dayton by this point, and so they went back to Dayton. And so this woman At the end of the article, she said, she had described the men earlier and so on, and at the end of the article she said, "I'm done with good-looking men." That's a direct quote. So they robbed, had already tried to rob, they didn't get any money, several other banks. This is, oh, okay, we're on to the next one here. But Zwick and his gang, I think they robbed 8 banks. There weren't a whole lot. Might have been, no, this guy robbed 8. They robbed fewer than that. And that one they got a little bit of, the one I showed you, they got a little bit of money. Phillipsburg is up outside Dayton, and a little boy had spent the night with his friend and came home, and in his back window he saw a guy with a machine gun. He was the son of the banker. They were holding the banker hostage until they could go in the morning to get the money out. And so he ran and alerted the town, and they ran Zwick off. That's another big story. That's in my book. That story of the Phillipsburg is a great story. But Zwick finally went to Toledo, which was another open town. If you had a little money, he went back to bootlegging, and even though he couldn't make quite as much, and they found him in Toledo. A young police officer who was fresh on the force arrested him and Rose, and Rose had the gun. Rose had a gun in her purse. The guy searched Zwick, but he didn't search Rose. And so Rose slipped him the gun. They shot at him. He got injured a little bit, but he was all right, and they ended up getting Zwick and shooting him. You saw the picture with all the bandages and so on. Bob Zwick went to prison off that and was there until not that long ago. I think it was 1990 that he died, something like that. He died at the age of 99. And he had Alzheimer's for a long, long time before that, and so no interviews, no jailhouse interviews or anything like that. But he lived, Dago Rose went straight, worked at a restaurant up in Marietta, Ohio, or Marion, Ohio, excuse me. All right, last banker, and my favorite. Rich Mergoins would have shot you. He already shot people, the one that was a tramp. Okay, we know that he would shoot you. Chapman, the dressed up guy, he'd shoot you just for fun, I think. He didn't care. He killed several different people. Zwick was a stone cold murderer, and he did unspeakable things. He was terrible before he became a bank robber. By the time he became a bank robber, people were so afraid of him, they'd hand him anything because his name was well known. So, young Hebenstreet is reading the headlines about Zwick, and he decides that he wants to be just like Zwick. So he gets together his buddies down in Reading, Ohio, some guys that are crooks themselves. They started by hijacking cars. They would one of their tricks was where there was a curve in the road in Reading, they would get on both sides of the curve, and when the car slowed down to go around the curve, they would jump onto the running boards with pistols and get the car, pull the car over. So sometimes they were seeing if they were running liquor, and then they would try to sell liquor, but sometimes they just did it for fun, or they'd just take your pocket change and whatever. They did that several times. A couple of them went to jail over that. So these were not nice children. They weren't playing well with others. And when Hebenstreet went to jail for pulling a gun on a police officer, and went to prison. When he came out of prison, that's what usually happens. They upgrade. Like, okay, we're stealing cars. Let's just rob a bank. So this is Mason, Ohio. All right, and this is right on the main drag of Mason. This bank, if you look at the lower picture, you've seen that bank. If you go up there now, those little scallops and everything. Inside there is an old building. It was actually an opera house upstairs, and there was a store and a bank down below. So Hebenstreet, they loved to steal cars so much that they stole a car in Cincinnati, ran the guy out of his car, got on his running board, made him get out of the car. They took that car, drove it around all night, and drove to Middletown. They went, again, I don't think you're Middletown people, but there's a mansion up there called the Sorg Mansion. And it looks like a castle. It's beautiful. Okay, it's on Main Street. And right next door to it, a guy had parked a beautiful Packard outside of his. He worked for Armco, American Rolling Mill. He was an executive, so he had a beautiful Packard outside there. And he gets up one morning and he looks out and his car is rolling down the street. Parked in its place is a little Ford that doesn't belong in this neighborhood. It's been stolen in Cincinnati. Behind the wheel is the beautiful woman that I showed you earlier. She was the getaway driver. And in the car were Heben Street and his friends. So they drove to Mason, Ohio, and she was still the getaway driver. They went in and robbed this bank, still a bank to this day, and left and headed toward where? Hamilton. That's where you dump your car, and that's where you're going to be able to spend some of your money at the brothels and so forth. So Heben Street spent a lot of time here in Hamilton. Was known. There are 2 or 3 addresses where he was known to stay, and so they found the Packard, found it, and that was the end of that story. He was wanted for that arrest, wanted for that bank robbery, but they never caught him for that one. Robbed a few more places. He robbed the Reading Bank, which was where he met my uncle, reconnected with my uncle, okay? Came back several weeks later and robbed the Reading Bank again. The second time, Zwick had tried holding the cashier of the bank hostage in Phillipsburg. It's a terrible idea. You have to hold him and his family hostage all night and hope that you're not discovered or anything like that. And then you've got this person, this hostage that you're going to take to the bank. They're going to help you get the money, you think. But these bankers were not sissies, okay? They did all kinds of things. They lied to them, said, oh, well, you can't get in there. There's 3 people know a part of the combination, and they're all 3 not here. They would tell them any lie so that they would just leave. And so it had turned into a big gun battle for Zwick, but Heben Street, that's what we'll do. We'll do what they did, only we'll do it better. We'll make it work. So they go to Reading the second time, go to nearby and hold the cashier hostage, get him there in the morning, and he waits till then to tell him, it's on a time lock. You can't get in until 8 o'clock. 5 minutes till 8 is when you can get in. So it's like 4 in the morning. Is it, okay, we'll wait. So they sit in the Reading Bank for 4 hours, ask him all about, they had just installed a gas bandit repellent system, okay? And so they knew all about that, all right? In fact, the guy who was selling it had been there the day they robbed the bank the first time. The salesman was in the bank, so they knew it was there. And so you would, if I went up to rob the place, the man or woman behind the little thing had a little pedal, and when they hit the pedal, tear gas would go into my face. So they asked all about that. They had that all down. But they ran out of steam. They ran out. The phone started ringing. The family was released. They thought the guy that was holding the family thought the robbery was over and released the family. And the family called the president of the bank and so on. So pretty soon the cops are around like, hey, what's going on here? So those guys, and the phone started ringing and drove them nuts. So they left the banker and left. So that was another Heben Street robbery. But eventually, and they robbed Silverton Bank in Silverton. Robbed it twice. They found a bank they liked. They'd rob it twice. So then they go, Heben Street is staying in Hamilton. He's got a place on Ross Avenue, and he's got a place on 2nd Street. Okay, and he's going back and forth. Plus, didn't talk to you about the fish camps. If you got to understand these bank robbers, we live where there are 2 rivers running down here, the Little Miami and the Great Miami, with all these fish camps along them, and that was robber heaven. They could change out vehicles, hide the whiskey, have their parties. They could do it all at once. They could hide out there. So there was a place in Ross where he was also hiding. His gun was eventually found there. So he's going between these 3 places and he runs out of money. So he's like, forget it, we're robbing the bank right here. Hamilton was so corrupt that no bank had ever been robbed. Because one of the deals, if you come into town and you're a crook, you say, look, you got 2 things you got to do. 1, you got to pay us. 2, don't rob our bank. That's it. You do that, stay as long as you want, kill people, do whatever you want. Just don't rob our bank and make sure we get paid. Okay? So they broke rule number 2. They're staying. This building, there's still a bank there. I think maybe it's open now. I think it was closed for a while. This is on Court Street. You could see the back of the courthouse from the John Walker building. It's not too far from where the Costas restaurant, remember the Costas restaurant? It's kind of like a few doors down from that was this building right here. And the bottom of this was a bank. So Heben Street now, he's had one guy with him. They go upstairs, and upstairs was a very unusual thing. It was a chiropractor's office. This is 1930. There's a chiropractor's office, and there's a female chiropractor, which was very rare. So she looks up, and here's a guy comes walking in, and he says to her, yeah, I'm thinking about going on a trip, and I heard there was a bank downstairs, and the woman was like, yes. He's like, does that bank, they'll lend you cash money, right? She goes, oh, yeah, I loan you cash. Does that bank close for lunch? And then he just walks out, okay? So she found out later. So a little while later, in walks Heben Street and a friend of his named Baltizer, who had been on several of the other robberies. They go into the bank. He had never done this before. If you were a 1930s bank robber, like the epitome, the all-time thing you could do was jump over the cage, because that's what Jesse James did, right? So they all read the little Jesse James books. So they're all dreaming they're going to jump over the cage. And so Heben Street finally did it, all right? He jumped over the cage. He landed a young woman. She was in her teens. And he landed on the book that she was doing her accounting, and landed on the book. And his feet are on the book. So then he backs her back into the thing, starts asking her how we get to all the money and so on. And they only got $900, and some of that was in bonds. So they didn't get very much money. When they left, they went out the door, and the cashier had been running an errand, came in behind them. As they're going out, the cashier's going in. So the people say, that guy just robbed the bank. So the cashier turns around. He's not as far as from here to the door away. By the time he gets back out to the door, they've disappeared. They've vanished. Some people thought that they had jumped into it. Some people said they saw him jump into a car, but they pretty much proved that didn't happen that way. Some kids stole a car a couple streets over, had nothing at all to do with the bank robbery. And so the police ran them down and found them in Middletown the next day and put them in a lineup. And the kids were like, we just stole a car. We didn't do anything. But so all that happened, but they never did find them. Now, I'm going to show you where they were. That's the Loveland Bank. We're right there. Do you know that house? This is 2nd Street, which we are on right now. Okay, if you go out here, go down 2nd Street, past the jail, past the old Sears building and so on, when you get to where the railroad tracks are, this is the house that sits on the corner of Sycamore and 2nd Street. This was a boarding house then, and it's basically a boarding house now. Okay, Heben Street probably, and you can basically see that if you see in the background, you can see he was in a building right next to this big building right there. And so it's pretty clear, no one ever said it for sure, but it's pretty clear that he escaped by walking home, that he walked home from the bank. They're all looking for a car, and so in fact they stopped the guy, and they said, look, we think you're a bank robber. And he said, why? Well, you've got a bullet hole in your car. And the guy's like, this is Hamilton. It's 1930. Everybody's got a bullet hole in their car, you know. And so he got away. So I think, and I'm pretty sure, I feel pretty confident that he and his buddy disappeared by going into an alley and going right back to that house. So a few weeks later, he went to Toledo and bought a car. He was always buying cars for the woman that I showed you earlier, a beautiful woman. She was in love with him, and she was in love with another guy from his gang. She actually had secretly married the other guy from his gang so that she wouldn't have to testify against him. And so Heben Street was a loser in the war of love, all right? But he didn't know that, and so he was still buying cars for Esther Jennett. And so he took the money from this robbery and whatever else he had and went to Toledo and bought a car. Came back, was coming down High Street in Hamilton. Sheriff Calhoun was going the other way and saw him stopped at a light and said, we know that car, that was, we know this guy, we're going to get him. And so he went to turn around. Now he's in Hamilton. What do you think happened? Got stopped by a train. Got stopped by a train. If you don't know what I'm saying, you're not from Hamilton, okay? He was stopped by a train. So Heben Street got away, but they knew the car. The car, a couple days later, was parked outside this boarding house. And Heben Street was sitting on that porch. It was 104 degrees. And so he was sitting on a porch in the shade. He couldn't go inside, too hot, whatever. And so the police easily caught Heben Street. And he went to prison after a couple of attempts to escape. Had some pretty dramatic attempts to escape. But he went to prison, came home. As many of them do, he went back to Reading. Mother still lived there on Maple Street in Reading. It was 1941. So he joined the war effort and worked at the Wright plant that was working for the Air Force, working to aircraft, working on aircraft. When he lost that job, he did some other things. Eventually, he ran himself into some trouble. He went straight. He never really got arrested, but it looks like he went over to northern Kentucky and worked as a dealer at one of the gambling joints. And somehow out of that, he got kidnapped, beaten, almost killed. His leg was broken. He's like 46 years old. And 2 years after that, there was a company that did sheet metal work. He was working for them. He's actually a foreman for them. And they sent him near Pittsburgh, a place near Pittsburgh, Kittanning, Pennsylvania. And so he goes up there. For some reason, and I don't understand, he was driving one of the hottest cars on the road. I mean, he's like a middle-aged man, basically, at that time, and had been clean, was not involved in robbery or anything. He was driving a 1947 Mercury flathead V8. If you put one on eBay today, you're going to get 1,000 calls. Okay, the hot rodders want that car. That's a fast car, beautiful car. He was driving one of those. And he and a guy from up there at night were driving on a winding road, and he died in a car wreck. Probably unrelated to any, I mean, he could have been drinking, obviously, but unrelated to any of, vendettas or anything like that. So that's what happened to Heben Street. It all started right here on 2nd Street. There's the picture on the right of when he was shot, cut, everything else, and that's obviously his young picture. So to me, Heben Street's kind of like family. I mean, after all, he went to school with my uncle. One of the most memorable days of my uncle's life was caused by Heben Street, and his family and my family are buried together. Okay, so I follow him closely. I know his Esther Jennings' niece and nephew, two different kind of trails of the family. I know them and talk to them, got some pictures and things from them. Lovely people. They have great stories about Esther. Esther, as I say, married another member of the gang and ended up living in Cincinnati, running a bar. And also they would go to Florida and just continue to live that kind of lifestyle. There's pictures of them sitting, they would go to Cuba and so on. And she lived until in the 1980s. So I'm very interested in bank robbers as people, just as, there's your family. When I showed you their gravesite, that's his sisters, his mom, his dad. I mean, you get to meet the whole family all at once. And so I like to follow him, and often it's very touching. That to me is a very sad story of what happened to him in the end. He really had gone straight. People knew him. I'll mention one other guy. I'm getting ready to give a talk in Reading. And one guy that was a childhood friend of his is named Joseph Fox. And I haven't mentioned him yet, but I'll just give you a little highlight real quick, and then we'll end up. Joseph Fox quit robbing banks with Heben Street early in 1930, got married, and he was actually robbing banks with another guy. He robbed a bank, of all places, Metamora, Indiana. Okay? How do they pick them? And so they rented a car. They're going to get traced. They rented a car in Cincinnati, drove it to Metamora, weren't too good at the old driving, drove it outside of town and turned it over in a ditch. And Joseph Fox went to prison. He went to prison at Michigan City Penitentiary in Michigan City, Indiana. He was in Michigan City, Indiana with who? Dillinger. But if you remember, Dillinger got released. Dillinger did his time and got parole. What did he do with his newfound freedom? He began robbing places. He didn't have a bunch of famous robberies yet, and he was stockpiling money because he had agreed to help his friends who were still in Michigan City escape. And so he had money, he had connections, he had a car, and he was actually not there on the scene when this happened, but he had arranged for guns to be smuggled in. They worked making shirts, and it was a thread box, had guns in it. And so Dillinger's far away. As a matter of fact, by the time it all happened, he was had been in Dayton and been arrested. He was actually in Bluffton or someplace. He was in jail. But anyway, it was his plan to go rob the place. So here's Joseph Fox, little Reading boy, minding his own business in jail, in prison, and he sees the guard going by like this on the floor. With guys got a gun behind him. So Joseph Fox like, you guys escaping from here? They're like, yeah. I'm like, can I go with you? They're like, sure. Okay, so Joseph Fox escaped with the Dillinger gang. He didn't like something about what they did right away. I mean, they were obviously wild. They ended up, a lot of those guys are famous names in all the movies and books and everything. And so he got away from them as quickly as he could. He never, according to him and according to most records, some people thought that he stayed with them and robbed places and had shootouts and everything, but he did not. He came back to Reading, ended up being the foreman of the city garage. And he had robbed cars. I mean, he had pulled people's cars over and stolen their cars, and then he became so when I say that I like to follow him kind of as people, he ended up being, I met a gentleman whose father worked for him, and he said he was a lovely man. They used to have dinner together, and a nice guy. So what happens to old bank robbers can be very interesting. Let's see, I think yeah, that page is just, I won't go over it, but there was a bank robbery in Trenton, another story, bank robbery in Monroe. There was a woman sitting here last time I spoke here, and in Monroe, the bank robber went in, and the teller said, oh yeah, here, I'll grab the money. And he reached under the thing, pulled out a pistol, and shot the bank robber dead right in the floor. And so the woman who was sitting here just a month ago, she said, that was my grandpa that shot him, the guy that shot him. A great story of a bank robbery in 7 Mile, same time, 1920, in December 1929. That guy took his dog with him to the bank robbery. So all right, that's all I've got, all right. You are a fabulous audience. I always overdo it, so you had to hang in there tough, because I'm not going to leave anything out if I can help it. Don't sit next to me on a long plane ride, okay? That's not going to be a good plan. But I do hope you buy my book when it comes out, okay? You can take your time on that. It doesn't have to be all fired at you at one time out of a fire hose. You can take your time with that. Does anybody have any questions or comments?